Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to start in one more minute. Okay, good evening, and thanks so much for joining this webinar from the Women's Resource Center featuring Ruth Brandwein. My name is Lori Gentile, and I'm going to be your host this evening. As you most likely noticed, this presentation is in webinar format, so all of the microphones are muted. But Ruth definitely wants to hear from you, so we've reserved time at the end, probably 15 minutes or so, for questions. So as the presentation is going forward, please drop your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then Ruth is going to answer them at the end of her presentation. But before I turn it over to Ruth, I'd really like to take a few minutes to tell you about this extraordinary woman. Ruth Brandwein, and excuse me, but I'm going to read because I really want to make sure I do her justice. Ruth Brandwein is a professor and dean emeritus of Stony Brook University. She's taught social policy at 4 universities, including holding an endowed chair at the University of Utah. She's the author of Pursuing Justice, One Woman's Life of Rebellion, Resistance, and Resilience, and has published over 50 scholarly publications. This is the cover of her book that you see on the screen right now. She has also served in leadership positions at the Council of Social Work Education and the National Association of Social Work, which granted her their Lifetime Achievement Award in 2018. Ruth has tirelessly advocated for legislation concerning women, children, and social justice at the local, state, and national levels. She has a PhD in social welfare from Brandeis University, a master's of social work from the University of Washington, and a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Brooklyn College. Ruth is the proud mother of 2 and has 4 adult grandchildren. So without further ado, it is truly my pleasure to introduce Ruth Brandwein. Take it away, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Lori. Let me just say something about the cover. Those are 3 pictures of me. Yeah, the 3 different aspects of my life. The first was uh, I was when I was 3 years old. Picture of me as a cute little girl. In the center, I'm giving a speech at Durban, South Africa, on social work and social justice. And on the right, I was a member of a rally about healthcare reform here in Sarasota in about 2021. So those are just different aspects of my life. People have asked me, why I wrote this book and how I was able to do it. When I was about 78, I was retired. I was living here in Sarasota. I was very happy. I was content. I was doing some legislative work. I was doing a lot of volunteer work, and I felt very fulfilled. But I realized that I had had a very, well, I won't say very unique because everybody's life is unique, but a very unusual life. And I wanted there to be a record of who I was. My kids, my grandchildren knew me for mom and grandma, but they didn't really know me as I was before they were born, as a child or as a young woman. I think our kids never see us as being young women. Um, so I started writing, and it was a slow process because I was living a very interesting life. In 2018, I rented a condo on Siesta Key for 1 week with no Wi-Fi and no TV. And I just started writing. I wrote all day, every day. And in a week, I had 5 chapters. Uh, this had all been brewing in my head. So when I sat down, it just came out. And then I got busy with other things in life and I set it aside. The next summer, I went to a friend's house and I stayed in the room upstairs and wrote also every day from like 9 to 5. and I did finish the first draft, about 10 or 11 chapters. Uh, and again, I got busy with doing a lot of other things in the community. I was on the Human Services Advisory Council for the county. I was a legislative co-chair for the Community Alliance. I was active in the National Association of Social Workers doing legislative uh, um, talks with legislators. So I was very busy, and I was happy, and I was also swimming and doing a lot of other things. So then the next year, I did a lot of editing. And then I kind of put it aside. I sent it to a friend, and she said, "You know, Ruth, your story needs to be heard by young women and even women like our age who've been through the second um, era of the women's movement, because your story could really be inspiring to people." So that made me think, well, gee, maybe instead of just writing it for my family, I'll try to get it published. So then I went through getting it published, and that was, I won't go through that. It was a little bit of a hassle because I didn't, I did not want to target it to be marketed the way some of the publishers were interested in. I wanted it to be my story. So I decided to just self-publish. So I finally, after a lot of storm and drang, finally had it completely finished and ready for publication in 2023, and it came out in 2024. So that was how it got written. And I'm glad I did it, and I'm glad it's over. And I don't feel any need to write anymore, although my life has continued. I could do, I did an epilogue to the book, but I could do an epilogue to the epilogue, but I don't think I don't think I will. So what I'd like to do is read you some excerpts from the book. And I start with the prologue. And again, as Lori said, at the end, I will be happy to answer questions. The prologue is called The Escape. I'm in the air. I'm flying. I'm finally free. On a plane at 30,000 feet, looking down at the white, billowing, blanketing clouds. I see nothing below. No dirt, no crowds, just a blanket under a brilliant blue sky. I had made it. I was free. I had escaped with my 4-month-old son and 3-year-old daughter, and I was on my way to Seattle. Why Seattle? He would never find me there. I had to disappear after he tried to kidnap Lorena. That was my 4-year-old. Months before, when I was pregnant with Garth, Mel went to a New Year's Eve party, leaving me home to care for our daughter so he could meet a new girlfriend. Shortly after that, he told me he wanted to move out. In our 6-year marriage, I had twice tried to leave, and he cajoled me back each time. The second time, I thought I was losing my mind. So I had resolved I would not try to leave him again, but if he ever left, I would do nothing to stop him. So when he said he was leaving, to his surprise, I didn't beg him to stay. I had supported us since I graduated college, and he had decided to become a, quote, artist, unquote. When he moved in with his girlfriend, he, quote, graciously allowed me to sell our loft and keep the proceedings. Of course, we did not own the loft, but in those days, you could get some cash if you found another tenant. They would pay you for the tip of the apartment, that the apartment would be available, and whatever furnishings you had. We had some secondhand appliances, many plants, and a mattress on the floor. The cash was supposed to support me until Garth was born and I could resume working. Where I would live was an open question. Soon after Garth was born, Mel came to visit. I got a used VW, boss, and we're going to San Francisco to meet up with my old guru. You and the kids are coming along. Somehow, once he had walked out of my space, it was as though a fog had lifted from my head. I could think clearly instead of going along with everything he wanted like a dutiful wife. No, I'm not going, I told him. Okay, I'll take Lorena. We'll have joint custody, and I'll bring her back in 6 months. No, I don't want you to do that. I knew that was crazy. First, I didn't even know where they were going. I would have no address or phone number to keep in touch with my child. This was in 1964, before cell phones. Second, he was already having her call his girlfriend mommy. Even if he did return, which was a question, I could see the scenario. Lorena thinks Heather is her mommy. They have bonded. She loves her. Don't you want what is best for your child? No, I would never agree to this ridiculous scheme. He threatened to take me to court and declare me an unfit mother. He admitted to entering and searching the apartment he had rented for me while I was in the hospital and stealing my journal. I had just begun putting down thoughts and fantasies and feared how they could be misinterpreted. Now it was summer. The Lower East Side, where we lived, was rank with garbage, gangbangers in the streets, simmering days and humid nights, and no air conditioning. Through my dad, I had learned about the Committee for Nonviolent Action, a peace farm in Connecticut, run as a commune. How great to get out in the country with the kids for a couple of weeks. I took a bus up there, but as a responsible parent, I sent my husband a postcard telling him we were away for just a couple of weeks and when I would return. It was idyllic. Lorena and I had the job of milking the goat every morning. The grass was green, the air was clean and smelled of fresh hay instead of diesel fumes, and I could relax for the first time in years. Then, to my horror, my husband showed up with his girlfriend on their way to California. He wasn't interested in our son, who was still an infant, but he pushed me hard and physically yanked a screaming 3-year-old out of my arms and got her into the car. I ran and tried to grab the keys out of the ignition, but could only get the license number. Was I going to lose my daughter? The peaceniks there stood aghast, but did nothing to try to interfere. It wasn't their battle. I called the cops, and this is one of the only times I've been glad for the traditional family values of young children belonging to their mothers. After all, we had no divorce or even separation papers. Technically, Mel had as much right to her as I did. When they stopped him, however, they found a concealed weapon, actually a blackjack, in his glove compartment. So they detained him and called me. Arriving at the police station, I found my daughter peacefully sucking on a lollipop. That's when I knew I had to get away. He would seek revenge, take the children, and God knows what else he would do to me. So that's the prologue. And in the book, then I go back and talk about my childhood growing up, about my family of origin. I grew up in a poor, lower middle class neighborhood in Brownsville, in Brooklyn, if people know where Brownsville is. But then I met Mel when I was 14. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. Well, I'm not gonna go into that. I met him when I was 14 and he was 16, and he was basically my first and only boyfriend. And I was under his spell. And finally, when I was 18, he persuaded me to marry him. His father, who had delivered seltzer and beer on Long Island, had bought Mel his own route. So now, Mel argued, we could afford to get married. I didn't want to, but I loved him, so what could I do? My parents opposed it, but feared losing me if they tried to stop me. Early in our relationship, and this may sound familiar to people, Mel had cautioned me that anything we said between us, I was never to repeat to anyone. I was no longer confiding in my friends. Mel had isolated me from them and turned me against my parents. I participated in putting them down, perhaps as a way of surreptitiously standing up to my mother. I didn't feel I had anyone to confide in. I felt isolated and trapped, but had no strength or self-confidence to say or do anything about it. This is a picture of me at my wedding. Let's see. Um, so we got married, and when I left, I moved to Seattle, and I started a new life there. I had gone underground. Um, I had all kinds of ways of hiding myself, which you can't do nowadays with the internet. And I finally, um, well, let me just read about this. I had met Mel when I was 14, and I was rebelling against my family. By 15, we were doing some heavy petting, and I was no longer a virgin at 16. After 4 years, we married, had two children, and separated after 6 years. In those 10 years, from 14 to 24, my brain and personality were still developing, but I had been deprived or deprived myself of the normal ways girls learn how to relate to boys. I was 2 years ahead of myself in school, and it was important in the 1950s to have a boyfriend, even if what we did was a secret. He would lie about so many things that I never knew the truth and could never fully trust him. I loved him, or thought I did, and was ambivalent about my feelings from the start. He hurt me terribly and destroyed my ego and self-confidence. And years later, I learned a name for what was happening. I had been emotionally abused. I never knew that until I started working on the area of family violence. I had been emotionally abused, and when I finally left him, I resolved that I would have to protect myself. I would be my own person. That first primary relationship taught me men could not be trusted. I feared I would lose myself if I allowed myself to get into too close a relationship. Um, so I made this life in Seattle, and finally, after 2 years, um, I was ready to get a divorce. And that was a very scary time because I was afraid he would find me. Um, I worked through my lawyer, so he didn't have my address, but he did know I was in Seattle. Now I'll talk about that. Now I could focus on the divorce, but I was terrified. My attorney had found Mel's address in California, where he now lived. We used my attorney's address instead of my own, but Mel would know I was in Seattle once the papers were served. I was in a state of constant anxiety. I'd come home at 10:30 p.m. from the center I was working at in the afternoon and evening, not knowing if I would still find my children there. I fantasized that he had come and whisked them away. I would I would open the door and fear that they wouldn't be there. Once I saw the back of a man in the street and feared it was he. As I got closer, I realized this guy was much taller and broader. I had made a new life, but realized I was still mentally locked into what I perceived of as his power. Mel did send me a letter through my attorney. This was his first and last letter. Never a birthday card or letter through my parents asking how the kids were. If he couldn't control me, he didn't give, excuse me, expression, he didn't give about the children he had fathered. The letter was rambling stream of consciousness with allusions to Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and New Age nonsense. He also said they were no longer his children, as I had ruined them and was the establishment's running dog. I kept the letter for a long time in case I needed proof of his instability. I won't go into the whole thing, but I did get the divorce. He never came. He never contested it, and I never asked for support for two reasons. One, he never supported me when we were married, and secondly, I knew from other women's experiences that that support was like a chain that they could pull. Sometimes they would give it, sometimes they wouldn't, and you're always at their mercy. And I just wanted a clean break. Fortunately, I had finished college, so I didn't have to go on welfare. I could have. In those days, you could go on welfare at that point, but I chose to work and managed to support the children. I mean, what we weren't, I wasn't wealthy. We were going to the um, um, consignment shop for used clothes. I didn't go out for dinner. We didn't buy very much, but we were okay. And the kids were okay, although they would have liked me to be home with them more. Um, so now I'm going to talk a little bit how I was working in Seattle. I got a very good, I got a decent job, and then I got a better job. And then I was starting to think about going back to school. I was now in my late 20s. My divorce was final, so I had the freedom to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. The university offered a course for women thinking of changing careers with the pretentious title, Decision is Destiny. Each week, we heard from different professors in various fields, including social work. I wanted to get a doctorate in archaeology or anthropology, but feared it would take too long. I might not be able to get a job supporting my kids in such esoteric fields. Through my job, I was working with a woman named Florence Steyer, who had just started a community organization program at the School of Social Work. And she urged me to attend the social work school and enrolled in the community organization sequence. I was pretty negative about social work, but I wanted to learn more to be a better community organizer. So, keeping my full time job with the Community Council in the fall of 1967, I enrolled in a as a part time student at the University of Washington for a Master's of Social Work degree. In the first year, I take only coursework, and the second, limited coursework and a 2-day field placement. So I was working full time. I was also doing this field placement 2 days a week um, and raising the kids. And it was difficult, but I was young and I had a lot of energy, and I had to use babysitters a lot. I didn't have much support at that point, although my sister and parents had moved to Seattle, but they had their own lives also. So I managed. And then when I was finishing in 1970 and graduating with my MSW, I already had a job offer as director of the Seattle King County Youth Commission, but I was considering going on for my doctorate. My argument with myself was that I was used to being poor. If I could continue to be poor with scholarship aid, and if I don't go now, I'll probably get too financially comfortable and won't be likely to give it all up to be poor again. On the other hand, I feared by having my PhD, I'd be too educated to ever find a man who would want to marry me. When I spoke to my other mentor, um, Reno Patty, my social work professor, he said, "Don't worry about it. You're already overeducated for the marriage pool." So that decided me. And I was given a very good fellowship from Brandeis at the Heller School. So I packed up my kids once more and moved 3,000 miles to Boston, which I thought I would be there for only 2 years and then move back to Seattle. But then there was a major recession in Seattle. There were no jobs. So I ended up staying in the Boston area and eventually moved on. I was given the opportunity to become as soon as I got my PhD, to be director of the School of Social Work in Iowa. And people said, "How can you leave Boston? How can you leave Boston?" Well, I was 5 years into my um, uh, faculty position, and at the time, the president wasn't giving tenure to a lot of people in sociology and social work. So I thought, well, I could stay in Boston and be out of a job in a year, or I could go to Iowa. They were going to double my salary, give me tenure, and move and a promotion to associate professor. So after about a week about thinking about it, talking to the kids, I decided to move. And again, as many men have done in their lives, I took the opportunity that came to move. They say you have to move out to move up. And it was a big risk to move to Iowa, but it was a great experience. And after a couple of years there, I ended up moving back to New York, which I never thought I would do. But I won't go into that whole story. That was um, when I came to Stony Brook. What I want to do now is conclude, and then we'll take some questions. Um, the rest of the book tells you about other parts of my life. I had a health crisis. I had a partner who I really loved in the 80s, late 80s and 90s. We bought a house together. And then it turned out he was bisexual and he had AIDS. And I was just very lucky that I never got it. But his death was horrible and a very, very sad time in my life. But I got through it. And, you know, I said, well, if I can't be happy, at least I'll be productive. So I was writing a lot those days because, what else was I? I also joined the Now organization and began to meet other people in the community and get to know other people, which I hadn't had time to do before. But this is all part of the book. And then I'm just going to read a little bit of the very ending and then open it up to questions. As I write and rewrite this memoir, I realize I have lived an exceptional life and have faced several major crises. At a very young age, I made a bad choice, as many women do. Finally, after great pain, I extricated myself from an abusive relationship. I thank whatever gods there be for my children. Yes, maybe I had them when I was too young to know any better, but having responsibility for them helped me make better decisions about how to live my life, to care for and protect them. Although I grew up poor, we lived in a three-room apartment on the fourth floor with two kids and one bathroom. I grew up poor. I had a stable family with middle-class values. My parents believed in education, work, honesty, and fighting for the underdog. While we didn't have many luxuries, we always had enough to eat and a roof over our heads. I was fortunate to live in an era when the government provided help. I never had to pay for my college or post-college education, and I was able to buy my first house with a minimum down payment, thanks to a program that the FDA had at the time. I know I was also lucky by being entitled as a white woman. At 26 years old, with just a college degree, I was chosen to lead a local Seattle agency. Would I have been chosen had I been a Black woman? In fact, I learned after taking the job that a Black man with an MSW and more experience than I had was turned down for the same position. There may have been other reasons, but I don't know that. I survived the fears I had when I finally applied for a divorce, terrified that Mel might reappear, that I might lose my children, but knowing I had to go through it. Similarly, when I had my illegal abortion, which I talk about in the book, but not here, I was fearful. They say courage isn't not being afraid, it's doing what you need to do, even when you are afraid. Bob's death from AIDS was a major crisis. I thought he was the love of my life, and it devastated my hopes for our future together, reawakening my distrust of men, and also put me in fear of losing my own life. I guess I have what the psychologists call resilience. Both in leaving New York for Seattle as a young poor woman with two babies, and then with Bob's death, I was able to focus on just keeping on. I used what skills I had and did not succumb to self-pity, alcohol, or drugs, or to sedate myself. My work and my children both allowed me to focus on what I needed to do. My next health crisis was my own health. Suddenly, I had not one but two possibly fatal diseases. I had both a tumor in my kidney and hepatitis C. It was a scary time, and the side effects of the hepatitis medications were no picnic. Still, I survived and am healthy with no recurrence of either disease. Although I have to say, I told Lori, I just had what they call minimally invasive open heart surgery last month, and I'm still recovering, but I'm doing fine. I have this incision on the side of my arm, but I'm walking, I'm talking, I'm doing things, and I'm getting back to myself. So I guess I'm resilient. I weathered all of these through a combination of fortunate circumstances and my own resilience. As the former dean whose school was in the Health Sciences Center, I had access to the best health care, including the very generous health plan of the state of New York. I'm acutely aware of how many people, especially women of color, do not have access to quality health care. I see the issue of social and economic injustice in my own life. I wish everyone had the benefits I was fortunate to have. Somehow, it seems, I have a positive disposition. I'm acutely aware of our nation's troubles and fear for my grandchildren's future. That is why I cannot and do not want to stop being involved in social action. I still get angry at injustice that I see around me. I may have slowed down somewhat, or maybe not, but but maybe yes. But I finally believe that it is up to me, to all of us, to be part of the solution. When I was young, I wanted to change the world. Now I just want to make a little part of my world, my community, city, and state, a little better for people. My father's ideology also reminds me that it is essential to make it better for us, the people, all of us. And that's like my conclusion. So I've said a lot in this short time, but I did want to leave time for questions and comments. And so I'm going to end now. I guess a little bit before I was going to.
That was such a beautiful ending, Ruth. I love that.
Thank you.
Just as a reminder to everybody on the webinar, we'd love to hear from you. Ruth would love to hear from you and answer any questions you might have. If you can just click on the Q&A box, it's a question mark in a square with Q&A on the bottom, a little bit towards the right of your screen, and type in your questions, and then we'll field them as they come in. But as
Let me
they're
see them.
doing that, Ruth, I have a question for you.
Okay, good.
Um, I mean, when I hear your story, I just have to ask, like, how you found the courage to leave your family and your friends and the whole life you built in New York. I mean, with two young children, you left your whole support system when you went out to
Yes.
Seattle. And I just can't imagine how you found, I mean, that took a lot of chutzpah, as we would say in New York, right?
It was really a desperation. And as I found when I was working in the field of family violence, often women finally find the courage to leave when they're afraid of how it's going to affect their children. I knew I did not want to lose my children. I didn't want them to go into foster care. I didn't want them to have to go with my husband. As a matter of fact, my daughter, not many years ago, met her half sister, who is the daughter of the girlfriend, and they lived in a commune. And I won't go into the details. I don't know all the details, but she had a horrible life. And my daughter said to me, "Mom, I'm so glad that you got us out
Oh,
of that."
yeah,
So it was something that I felt I almost didn't have a choice. I had to do it. I had to do whatever I could. I also knew that if I was going to do it, I had to do it right. That I wasn't going to let him find me and just go back to this whole thing. So I was very lucky. I had this lawyer who I think probably worked for the students of for the Democratic Society or something, because he knew, or the Weather Underground, he knew what to do to make me
oh,
disappear. Like he said, for a while, use one digit wrong on your social security number, so you can't be traced. And then after a couple of years, I went back and said, "Oh, I made a mistake," and I got everything back.
right.
I also used a pseudonym, which you can't do now. I mean, I got and I was afraid to leave from JFK or LaGuardia, and so I had met some people after I had broken up with Mel, who lived in Staten Island. I went to Staten Island, stayed with them, and from there went to Newark Airport and left from Newark Airport. So
Wow.
I was smart enough to think ahead and do everything that I could. The other thing the lawyer told me was, if you write to your parents, don't write in an envelope with your return address, because he could get into the mailbox. Find some people who your parents knew in another state. I would write a letter to them with a letter to my parents inside their letter, and then they would send that letter to my parents with their return address. I don't know if he ever tried to do that, but if he had,
Right.
he wouldn't have been able to do it. So I was taking all these precautions because it was like I had to do it. I had to do it. Also, I have to tell you that when I first came to Seattle, it was tough. I mean, I was working. I got a job working from 10 to 2, from 2 in the afternoon to 10 at night, so I could be with the kids in the morning and at lunchtime, and then had somebody put them to dinner and put them to bed. But I remember I had a quotation on my mirror. Um, I am the captain of the ship. I am the master of my fate. And I think it was right at Tennyson. And I would just read it every day, and till I started to believe it, that I am the captain. I can decide my own fate. I can make the choices. And I started making my choices. And so that a long answer you short to your question.
I love that. Yeah, I guess it's kind of amazing what you do for your children, right?
And
Or
as I
what you're
said,
capable of
yeah,
doing.
as I said,
Yeah.
I was 21 when I had my daughter, 24 when I had my son. But that helped by knowing that I had them. Maybe if I didn't have them, maybe I would have been doing drugs at that time. That's what a lot of young people were doing. Who knows what I would have done, you know? But because I cared about the children's lives and I loved them and I wanted to protect them, that gave me the courage, that gave me the strength to do what I had to do.
Yeah, yeah. We have someone who wrote in and asked if you could show the picture you tried showing us because it didn't come up on the screen.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. Um, this is a picture of me signing the
I
ketubah.
think maybe try lifting it up a little bit because we can only see the text. Yeah, a little bit more, a little bit. There you go.
Okay. I can show you a couple of other pictures also.
Beautiful.
I can show you some wonderful pictures of my children in Seattle when they were little. If I can find that picture.
And then while you're looking for that,
Oh, here it
another
is.
attendee
Here
typed
they
in, oh, look how cute. I love it.
on the
Oh,
beach in Seattle. Yeah,
they said,
I
thank
do it.
you, beautiful. And another person typed in, I don't have a question, but your story is inspiring. And then in quotes, if you had to do it, you had to have to do it right. Like
Exactly.
you said, it isn't perfect, but she says, your story gives me hope for my own life.
Oh, I'm so happy. That's exactly why I'm telling this story because I wanted to uh, let other women know that things are hard and they can get better, and you just have to keep on keeping on and not give up and just have know that you have that inner strength and you can do it. So thank you for that. It
Oh,
makes it all worthwhile.
yeah, yeah, I bet it does. I'm another attendee typed in amen exclamation point. Oh, any
Now, I
other
know,
questions? Go ahead, finish your thought. I just wanted
yeah,
to.
no, I know that things are hard nowadays. It's not the same as it was. I mean, I lived in a time when there was federal support for education and for housing and things are different now. And that's part of the reason I keep doing all this legislative advocacy because it's important. And there's enough money for all kinds of stuff. And then they say, well, we don't have enough money for to do things for poor people. Look what happened during COVID when under the Biden administration they gave the child tax credit to poor families, and child poverty was reduced by 50%, just like that. Just by having the tax credit. And people were, they thought, oh, they're going to use it for drugs and alcohol. No, they used it for their kids. They used
Right.
it for school clothes. They used it for childcare. And and then it went away and the poverty rate is up again. And childcare is a real problem. I had a problem with childcare. I had a lot of babysitters. I had my kids went to Mount Zion preschool. My son did when my daughter was in school. He was probably the only white kid in the class because we lived in a mixed neighborhood. He got a great experience of working with children of color, but I was constantly trying to um, juggle my working, and then I was doing community organizing, so I had to be at meetings 3 nights a week also. I'd always be home and have dinner with the kids, and it was always a hassle because I'd be tired, they'd be hungry, and you know how it is when the kids are hungry and they start being but
Yeah.
but I did it, and then I would have a babysitter come in and stay with them for a couple of hours, and I would put them to bed. And then as they got older, I remember I'd have talk time with them. Uh, I I would sit at their bed when they were going to sleep, and they could just talk to me about anything that was going on. And when I was working for my PhD, it took me 8 years from the time I started at
Wow.
Brandeis until I got it. But that was because I thought, the kids are going to grow up. I have to have time with them. So every weekend we had family day. So we'd go bowling or we go to a movie or I try to get them to go to a museum. That didn't always work. But, you know, I would I felt it was important that I spend time with my kids. And when we moved to Boston, we camped. We camped from Seattle most of the way to Boston. I didn't even have camping equipment. I had a tarp, and in those days it was pretty safe to camp at a campground or a national forest. And we would just sleep out with our sleeping bags and make dinner over the campfire and uh, and we go to all these different places like Wall Drug and uh, the oh in South Dakota where the the
Rushmore?
right, thank you, Mount Rushmore. So we did fun things. And then
Yeah.
one year before we left, my sister and brother-in-law were in California. He was doing summer school at Palo Alto. So we camped down the coast through Oregon and California. And that was
Oh, what a
great fun.
beautiful trip. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we'd maybe go 200 miles a day. We'd stop and look at tidal pools, and we'd stop. And so I did things with the kids. We didn't have much money, but it was important for me to
Yeah.
to to be there for them as much as I could, even though I was working and going to school and all the rest of that.
It's a challenge to balance all that,
Yeah.
community involvement and working and being a mom, and it's a
Yeah,
juggling
my son was say, "Why can't you be a regular mom?" I said, "What's a
act.
regular mom? Be home when I come home with milk and cookies." And,
Oh, I
you know,
love it. We have
but
someone else who typed in, Ruth, saying, I made the decision to get a divorce and I'm filled with fear, but I see women with children make this decision. I don't know why I'm so afraid.
I with two other women, we did research on divorced mothers from a non-pathological viewpoint, because there's a single parent family, a broken home. There's not a broken home. What we found is that there's often more stress and anxiety with the kids when the marriage is going bad, because kids pick up what's going on. And after the divorce, there's a period of readjustment, and it's what we call from disequilibrium to re-equilibrium. And after the initial difficulty, it becomes calmer. It's a different lifestyle, and it's hard, but you can go through it. And when you do, you will feel better because you will be your own person. And you may not have as much money, but you know, there are a lot of people with money who are pretty miserable. And I know that the courts are not always favorable to women. You're supposed to be able to get support. Sometimes you don't get it. The guys play all kinds of games. My niece has still problems with her ex after 10 years of going back and forth to courts and trying to get money, but she's determined to get the money. To me, I decided the hell with the money. I'll I'll get rid of him and not deal with it and just make it on my own. And if you can possibly do that, I think you're better off.
Yeah,
I hope that's helpful to you.
I love that. Okay, well, I think that might be the last one, Ruth.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's really been a pleasure. I wish I could have seen everybody. I am talking, well, I saw you, but I like talking and seeing people's faces and reacting to people. But I hope that people uh, got something out of it, and I'd be glad to, if they have questions afterwards, maybe they can get to you and you can let me know, and I'll be happy to to talk to people about it. But
Absolutely. Yeah,
anyway,
yeah. We
if I can just give a plug for my book, it is available from Amazon, and you can buy it as a Kindle for about $6 or $7, or a paperback for about $16, I believe. So people tell me it's a great read. It took them 2 days to read it. Some they said, "Oh, I was reading till 1 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't put it down, and I got up the next morning and finished it." So I think you will find it. I tried to make it move quickly and be interesting, and because it's a story that I think is worth telling, and for people to hear about. So thank you for the opportunity, Lori.
Oh,
It's really
Ruth,
been a
thank you
pleasure.
so much. We just got one more in of
Good.
someone saying thank you.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
but thank you for your time tonight, and for teaming up with the Women's Resource Center to be able to bring your story.
Whenever I do this, it makes me really feel good just to kind of relive everything and realize that, yeah, I did it. And you can too.
Thank
To
you.
this to the Women's Resource Center for all the great work that you do.